Welcome to Abide in Liberty, a podcast empowering patriots everywhere to re-enthrone faith, family, and freedom as the bedrock pillars of liberty in education, our communities, and our nation.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back for this week's episode of Abide in Liberty. When we did last week's episode to kick off the No Screen November challenge, my thought was that would be a one-time thing, and then we'd get right back to kind of the regular stuff that I talk about, get back to the miracles of the American Revolution, but we're going to put that on pause for the duration of No Screen November because as we've continued to study and learn and continue to speak with parents and hear their concerns, I think there's a lot of benefit to addressing those concerns that we're hearing, as well as to provide a little bit more in-depth information into different aspects of the book that we're getting this from, Reset Your Child's Brain. So real quick, there's a lot to cover. We're still not even in the next few weeks, going to be able to scratch the surface of everything that this book covers. But hopefully we can give you a little bit more meat to both kind of help stiffen your resolve if you're like us and a little bit nervous about exactly what this is going to entail over the next, 3.5 weeks. But also hopefully give you more information that you're going to need to continue to be successful after the fast is over and you're looking at long-term changes. So if you're interested in listening to this during No Screen November, I would recommend using the podcast. So if you search for Abide in Liberty and subscribe to that podcast, you'll get notifications for these new episodes. I highly recommend that. Listening to a podcast like this doesn't tend to be as hyper arousing unless we start adding all kinds of different noises and things. Unfortunately for you, you're just going to get mine and Bonnie's voices. So kind of more similar to what you would get, 100 years ago from a radio program. Now, the one thing that we both have been giving a try since, gearing up for this No Screen November challenge is to start listening to podcasts at normal speed. I would typically listen to it at about 1.5 times speed. You get through a lot more information, but those I kept, I was drawn to wanting to spend more and more time listening to podcasts. And since I've just been listening at normal speed, I still do listen, but I don't feel quite as out of control with it. Like I'm more purposeful in when I'm listening, when I'm not, and just saying no isn't that big of a deal. So even that extra fast input can be hyper arousing. So for No Screen November, if you're like me, I'd recommend slowing this down and just listening to it at normal speed so you can still get the benefits of the fast while getting the information that you need.
And your brain will be able to process it, and then you're going to be able to hear your own thoughts about it. Versus when we just listen really fast and we're like, our brain is barely able to just absorb and we're not able to critically think and come to our own conclusions based on what we're hearing and understanding. So there's lots of benefits to reading or to listening to it just at normal speed.
Yeah, I've gotten through far fewer podcast episodes, but I remember and I'm applying what I'm learning more frequently because I can actually remember it, at least at a deeper level. Okay, if you're jumping into this and you didn't listen to last week's podcast, I highly recommend going back and starting there. That's going to lay important groundwork for today and the subsequent weeks. But first, for the first little section of this, we want to address some concerns that we've heard either as these have come from folks as we've been talking with them, parents mostly of the school, about their concerns or just questions that they've had. So before we do that, though, Bonnie wanted to correct something that was said last week.
I did. I keep going through this book, but I was going through again and found the place where she talks about what age she would introduce interactive screens if she had her way. And she said it wasn't before the age of 12. So even what I was saying when I was asking, please don't do it before the age of 10. I think I said that she recommended none before the age of 5. I was totally wrong. She recommends no interactive screens until 12 years old, and even then only on a limited basis to learn how to use a computer. So that doesn't mean the handheld device that's right with you. That means an interactive screen being a desktop computer that is still set back from you, and it's for learning how to utilize and use a computer, not a handheld device that is specifically designed to be super easy to learn and to interface with. That's not something that they need access to until much later in their life.
Okay, thank you. So, first concern, medium is more important than content. A parent had a very valid concern that, we provided this quote, we brushed over it quickly in the podcast, and we sent home to our school families a printout that had that quote on there. And she had a very valid concern that, well, so what about pornography? Are you saying that, a Playboy magazine then is preferable to even some innocuous things on the screen? We weren't able to provide all the context in that short little printout or in our very quick podcast last week. But how would you respond to that concern?
I would say that you have to compare apples to apples. So really where she was talking about that, she had a lot of parents who were like, okay, well, what about just educational games? What about if we just are FaceTiming grandma? What if we are doing, whatever, something that is considered positive? And she said that you can get into the nitty-gritty of all the little details. And really, at the end of the day, the best thing is to remove all screens. So that was where she was saying that medium was more important than content. You can play educational games physically. We actually do that in our schoolrooms, in our classrooms. We play math games. And those are really beneficial in real time with human beings, with actual manipulative materials that you are using to manipulate and live in the real world. Those are beneficial. But a screen version is not going to be the same. So she was just saying that you can't, there's nothing that is worth it on your screen to continue. So there's nothing that she would say, oh, that's worth it to keep it up. She's like, nope, just take it away and reset completely.
So if you take an educational matching game on an iPad versus that same educational matching game on your tabletop, because of the medium of the first, of it being on your iPad, it will cause problems. It will cause the dysregulation, the nervous system disruption, all of those things. And even if so what the point she was trying to make with that is saying, okay, I'm not going to let them play Candy Crush or Angry Birds. I'm going to let them play educational games. In that instance, the harm is being caused more by the medium than by switching content from one thing to the other.
Yes.
And I guess you could say under, following that same science that, pornography in a printed versus a digital form, both of them are going to crater your soul. and consuming that kind of perverse material is terrible no matter what kind of form you take it in. But if it's a digital form, you're also going to get the nervous system disruption on top of cancering your soul and destroying your ability further to have human relationships. So
if it's
hopefully that
content,
makes sense.
It's terrible content no matter what version it is. But.
Exactly. Yeah. And I guess that's the important part, that taking good content and putting in a bad medium is still bad.
Yes.
But you can't do anything to take bad content and put it in a good medium and make it okay. It's not a two-way street. I think that's the point she's trying to make. Okay. Thank you. So, another concern is, and this isn't one that anyone voiced, but I could see, parents being concerned with, your kids aren't going to be normal. They're not going to be able to interact with their friends. When you sit, I work with the young men's group, and so much of the conversation when we're driving to and from activities revolves around whatever video game they're playing, whatever movie they're watching. So how do your kids have a quote unquote normal social life in 2023 if they're not exposed to all these games and videos? What are they going to talk about?
They're going to gravitate perhaps towards new friends who are willing to live in a world that's not digital. So she talks about how in all of the cases that she's done this with everybody who has done a screen fast, not a single one of them has had negative social experiences. Not a single one of them has had a negative impact on their social life. A lot of them have seen improvement. They've had better connection with friends. They've had more friends. They're kind of spearheading new groups. They're like, let's go meet at the park. Let's play this game. They're living more in the real world and they're thinking creatively. And a lot of kids gravitate towards that because those are the fun kids. Those are the fun ones to hang out with. They're not going to have negative, lasting impacts on their social life. It's going to improve. It just will change.
Right. And so it's also interesting when she looks at the research here that you've got kids who spend a lot of time gaming. This is what they're talking about, but overall they report lower social satisfaction.
Yes.
They just do because of all these reasons. So the
It's not
ability to
actually
talk
connecting.
about all these details with a video game actually don't lead to intimate, lasting emotional connections that are healthy for our kids to be learning how to develop. So that's why they're reporting higher
Well, if you think-
satisfaction socially when they are off screens, because they're able to talk about things that are more meaningful and lasting.
Think about what emotions they're talking about when they're on their video games. Like, what emotions are they talking about? Frustration? Like, there's not like those deep connecting things. Like, I remember the games that I played as a kid. My family was very low tech. We had a Friday night movie night, and that was what we got. We didn't spend time on anything. We did do a typing game for 15 minutes every day for part of our schoolwork. But like, we were very, very low tech. And I remember the connections that I made with my friends over playing like Animal Trainer, where they were animals and I was the trainer. And like, but it was like we processed through different emotional situations, like, oh my goodness, I lost this animal, the frustration, or like team building. Like, I was like, ooh, let me grab this other, team member so that I can come and we can capture this really hard to find animal. And like, it was very different than the interactions that they have on the screens. And I think that is important to understand the connections that they're making across or based on the screens activities are not things that are truly lasting and truly personality building.
And I think that leads right into the next concern. Like so many teenagers these days communicate through these group chats. And I think the exact same thing is going on. There are kids that are involved and they're staying up late and coming into school tired, or up late on the weekends and then coming in Monday exhausted and having to take a couple days to get back into the swing of things. Like these are not kids that are reporting that they're feeling well established and confident and happy socially. So these conversations about video games or having these, little chats over text, they're creating an illusion of connection. And that's the whole problem with social media. They create the illusion of connection, yet despite so much interconnectedness online, people are feeling more isolated, more depressed, more alone than ever before.
And some of that is the content of those text communications. They're on these group chats and they see these group chats where they're talking negatively about someone. And they're like, wait a second, is there a group chat that exists where I'm the one that's being talked about? There was another book that I was reading. It was about teenage brains. It's called Brainstorm. And it talked about this, teenager who, he was in the lunchroom, whatever, he tripped and lost his lunch tray and spilled it all over himself and whatever. And he's like, 10 years ago, that wouldn't have been a big deal. But all of a sudden there were like 30 phones and they posted it on social media. And now this kid is ostracized and whatever. And like this social world that we live in is not healthy for the teenage brain that is already thinking that the world revolves around them and they're so egocentric. It's so damaging because they're constantly thinking, well, what are people saying about me? And when they have those text chains going on early in the morning, like we're talking 2:00 in the morning, like these are happening not at healthy times when they should be asleep. But also when we're in that stage of mind, are we being our best selves, or are those teenage conversations that are happening not the best version of themselves? And they're seeing that, they're showing that lesser version of themselves. And that's not a healthy space for them to live in.
And even if they're not staying up late, screen usage has been linked with an inability of the brain to go into REM sleep. So if they're not able, they might be sleeping 8 hours or 10 hours, or they might be sleeping a healthy amount. But if that screen usage is keeping them from going into deep REM cycles, they're still waking up exhausted. So if you've ever done that, or if you've ever had a kid that complains about that, that's why. So they're not able to get deep sleep. So they're tired all the time. They're grumpier. And I don't know about you, but when I'm, chronically tired, I'm not presenting my best self socially. I'm not a fun person to be around. And so it tends to create more negativity, which creates more uncertainty, it's just this kind of vicious cycle that keeps going. By the way, if you hear chirping in the background, we just got chicks this week. They're only a couple days old, so they're not old enough to go outside yet, but apologize if that's a distraction.
But also if your child has a especially sensitive nervous system, even like a lot of teenagers sleep with their phones, and just that phone being in their bed with them, the electromagnetic fields that it gives off can disrupt their sleep. Like it's recommended that there's no screens in the bedroom. That includes handheld devices. And we've heard that for decades. No screens in the bedroom. Absolutely no screens in the bedroom. That's not a new message. That's an old message. And yet we think it doesn't apply to phones, but it does.
Yeah, I noticed that for myself. A couple nights ago, I wasn't feeling well. I felt like I was coming down with something. So I went to go lay down and I just like laid down on the bed. My phone was right there. And every time it buzzed, like I was awake again and alert. I was drifting off to sleep. But that like a little bit just woke my brain up. That was that dopamine release. And I had to go put it away. I mean, it was silly, but I hope I've got a fully formed, developed brain here, but it still impacts me that way. And on an undeveloped brain, it's even more so. All right. So what about the concern? The world we live in is surrounded by screens. We're never going to get 100% away from emails or whatever that is. Zoom calls are unfortunately, are probably here to stay in some form or another forever. So what about the concern that they need to be prepared to live in this world? So we have to start teaching them early how to do that responsibly.
You're starting too early. You're frankly starting too early. After the age of 12, sure, let's teach them how to use a computer the proper way. Let's teach them how to use those typing skills. Let's teach them some of those basic things that can happen in a very safe way. Limited, 15 minutes. Like it really doesn't take long to develop typing skills. I'm a fantastic typer and I practiced for 15 minutes, maybe 3 days a week. And that was it. Like it doesn't take a long time. All other electronic interfaces are specifically designed to be easily accessible, to be very, very quickly learned. And think about when you were a kid. Everything that I learned that came to technology is obsolete today. So everything that our children are going to learn is going to be obsolete by the time they hit the workforce. Everything that they know. The floppy disk is a thing of the past. Like
Oregon Trail was big when I was in elementary school.
None of it is anything today. Everything that I use today for my career has been developed within the last 10 years. So if you think about that, nothing that you do today on technology for our children is going to prepare them for the workforce. That is just a blatant lie that is very pervasive in society, but it's just not true. So think about your own experience. They're going to be fine because everything is made to be super, super easily accessible, really, really fast to learn, intuitive. Everything today is going to be obsolete by the time they hit the workforce. So don't do it.
And not to mention the fact that, if we look at screens as a tool and not just as an entertainment box, but as a tool that we use, different tools are appropriate for different ages. I might let my 6-year-old use a hammer under strict observation or, getting used to it because they might hurt their thumb, but not going to cause any lasting maiming or damage, hopefully. But I'm not going to let that 6-year-old drive a car. Yes, they're going to need to live in a world where automobiles are how they get around, but that doesn't mean we put a 2-year-old behind the wheel of a car.
Or even a 10-year-old.
Yeah, they're not developmentally ready for it. There's awareness that comes, the ability to focus on multiple things at the same time. I mean, even just the vision, what they can process visually. They talk about like your tunnel vision until you reach a certain age, and then your periphery develops and being able to assimilate all of that. There's so many different things that come into play there. Or a table saw. I might let my 15-year-old start to practice a table saw now because but that takes a lot of self-awareness and paying attention to a bunch of different things. Screens are no different. Yes, is it a tool they're gonna have to learn how to use, but at the right time and at the right place and when they're developmentally able to handle it. And that might be different for each kid. The way that we implement that with my son might be a little bit different from my daughter. Boys tend to be more drawn and easily addicted than girls. I mean, that's going to take prayerful consideration and knowing each child and being very careful about how we approach that. That doesn't mean we're not going to.
And utilizing the knowledge that you have. The prefrontal lobe develops a lot in those younger ages. It goes through an explosion of growth in those teenage years. So are you really sure that right when they're getting this explosive growth in their prefrontal lobe, you want to give them a screen that's going to redirect the blood flow from that prefrontal lobe? Or do you want to let that prefrontal lobe develop a little bit more? I got my first cell phone at 19 years old. I got my first flip phone. I don't actually know. Was Jackson a baby? When did we get our first phones? I don't even know.
I don't know.
After we were married, we got our first smartphones. Like it doesn't have to happen. And I'm so grateful for that, right? Because even still, I'm addicted to my phone. Even still, I am so nervous about starting this screen fast on Monday. And I just kind of put two and two together. My husband, Braden, is going to be in St. George this week. So I get to do the first week of Screen-Free November on my own with my girls. And it's going to be an interesting thing because typically when he's gone, I don't sleep well. So I'm normally on my phone, which probably is a self-perpetuating issue as I say it out loud. But yeah.
Okay. All right. Next concern. If you're a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, missionary work is moving more and more online. So the church is doing this. How can screens be so bad then?
Isn't it so amazing how God is so good at making the best of a bad situation? I'm just so grateful he's so good at making the best of a bad situation and bringing good out of something that is really hard on a lot of us as humans.
Amen. I think that's enough said. God's going where the people are. And unfortunately, people are living less and less in the real world and more in a digital one. So he's going to meet them where they are. And hopefully, as he does with all of us, make us better than he found us. So,
and where does he want them to go after they can make those connections on social media? He wants them to go to church. He wants them to make those real life in-person interactions.
Yeah, that doesn't mean that God's ideal missionary work situation is the one we have now, but we got to deal with what we got. I don't know that for sure. That's just my...
I haven't talked to anyone in church leadership.
That's our
just
2 cents.
My perception.
Okay. Now, there was another concern that came up, and I can totally see how this is the case, that, when we shared the statistic that 11-year-olds today are performing at the level of 8-year-olds 30 years ago, that could be perceived as shaming or kind of just using fear to motivate. What are your thoughts on that?
I think knowledge is power, but I think we have to be really careful with monitoring our own brains and our own emotions. As a mom, I'm really good at beating myself up over the things that I do wrong. And this new information, I'm like, oh, crumb. And I don't know if Braden feels the same way, but we were video game free for a long time. And then just this summer, we were like, oh, it'd be really fun to have a Nintendo Switch. So dang it, we have one. And it's way easier just to not ever have one than it is to take one away. So I'm already like kind of working myself over just a little bit for even that. So the knowledge that we don't have, we can't feel guilty over. But I do feel like it's super important to gain more knowledge. And then I have to manage me and I have to say, okay, Bonnie, you have new knowledge now. Don't beat past Bonnie up for doing the best that she could with the knowledge that she had then. But let's be the next best version of Bonnie and let's try to do what's best for my kids without the guilt, without the shame, because I didn't know better. But now I do. So now I have to make different choices.
Yeah. Amen. I mean, this is one of the hardest things about the atonement for me anyways, is I know that Christ will forgive me, but I'm the last person to forgive me. Long after he's forgiven and forgotten, I'm still remembering and I'm still beating myself up. So this is no different than anything else. When we make mistakes in ignorance or we're just hanging on and doing the best we can and we're just, we were surviving for a time, whatever the case is, nobody's perfect. And if we're going to let our past imperfections hold us hostage to continuing bad habits or continue making bad choices, that's a problem. But if we can learn from what happened in the past and do better in the future, that's really all that can be expected. And then that's where the atonement comes in. All of those things can be fixed retroactively. Some of them in the next life, some of them in this life, but that power is real, and it is no less real in this situation than it is in any other.
And if anyone feels like they're getting judgment from us, I will say, please know that you're not. Please know that you're not. Like, we are not judging anybody. Your kid could be on the screens from the time they wake up to the time they get dropped off and from the time they get picked up to the time they go to bed. There's no judgment. We're just trying to share the knowledge that we have so that we can try to make life better for all of our kids and for all of our families. That's really all we're doing. We're just trying to help share good and important knowledge that we have, because now we feel like we have information that we didn't have before. And we feel like with that knowledge, it's our responsibility to share it with those in our sphere. And we are blessed that we have a little bit of a larger sphere than I did 10 years ago. And so we can share that in a little bit of a wider, we can cast a little bit of a wider net and share that knowledge. But there's no judgment coming from us. The decisions that we've made, it might be different from the decisions that you've made, but it doesn't mean that we feel like we're any better than you are. We're all just struggling along and trying to make the best decisions that we can with the information that we have.
And I can empathize with feeling a little bit of guilt. I've struggled with this a little bit just over this no screen thing, because, Bonnie mentioned that we didn't know any better before. I think we kind of did. We saw a lot of these patterns. We saw things happening with our own kids and with other people's kids. And, I was always a little bit gun shy about, do we really want to open that? Are we really, is what we're seeing really right? Or is there something else going on? Like I second guessed it. And it wasn't until we had this book chock full of research that supported kind of what we already knew and suspected and what we probably received some promptings on before. But now we feel like we've got enough to do something. Man, if we could have done this, that was what's been going through my head. If we could have started this 4 years ago, 5 years ago, and we kind of saw these patterns. So if you're in that boat, I feel you. But it's not going to do us any good doing that. But we can do a world of good for our kids. And then we can start a movement that will hopefully change. When parents start seeing your kids well-adjusted and responding well and their grades are fine and they're asking, what are you doing differently? You can share that with them. Like this can reverse course. This country, it was built on doing things different. Everyone had a king and we said, no, we're going to do it differently. Well, everyone's on screens. Everyone has a screen. Everyone has a phone. We can choose to do it differently and we can reverse course, at least in our families, if not, in this small community, but it could reach farther than that. So anyways, onward and upward, don't look back. Let's keep moving. So, and we'll apply that to our podcast here. Let's keep moving. So this podcast was published the first day of No Screen November, November 6th. So what should already be in place before starting the Screen Fast? What should people already have in place? If you don't have these in place already, it's not too late. Don't delay starting the Screen Fast, but go ahead and let's knock these out now.
Yes. Make sure that you have pick a child, one kid in your family that you feel like is the one that maybe is the most affected by screens. Choose 2 or 3 areas of behavioral areas or whatever areas that you feel like you are the big hitters in your family, and start a log. Start keeping track of those behaviors. So whether, I think last time we talked about sleep, we talked about fits, but like whatever those behaviors are, just choose the 3, start tracking today so that then you can see improvement over time. Our brains don't give justice. We need logs. Like truly we need logs. She tells a story about one mom who's like, it's not getting any better. It's not getting any better. And luckily, Victoria Dunkley had kept a log prior to, and this girl was having just huge meltdowns 2 or 3 times a week. And then she came back, the mom came back and she's like, it's not working. It's not working. She's like, when was her last fit? And she's like, last week. And she's like, what? It was last week? That's amazing. She's like, but the intensity of the fit is the same. And she's like, but that's fine because the frequency has dropped significantly. So you got to keep track of those things so that you can understand, like, these are truly the benefits that I'm seeing. Also, you need to do a screen sweep. She recommended doing at least 2 screen sweeps. So if you've done one, do another one just to make sure that you've caught all of those screens. Take all of the cords, take all of the whatever it is. Don't just take the controller, take the actual device, lock them away in a safe, put them at, get them out of your house, send them to work with whoever goes to work and make them put them in a cupboard at their work. Like, just try not to keep them.
If you could work at Raytheon, that may not work, but be creative.
Sorry, employees. Be creative. Try to get them so that there's no possible way your kids can find them stashed in a cupboard under a bed or wherever it is. So those are really the 2 big things that you need to make sure that you have in place. I would also recommend having some ideas for boredom busters, things that you can do. Our school has a calendar coming out on Monday that's chock full of amazing, wonderful things that our families are banding together to be able to do. Bike rides and game days and all kinds of amazing things. I'm so incredibly excited. So if you live in the Sarita area and you want to join us, you let us know and we'll send you a calendar and let you know where to be and when to be there so you can join this community tackling this. We'd love to have more people involved. So come up with some ideas. They don't have to be expensive. They don't have to cost any money at all. We're going to take every single game in our cupboards and we're going to play every single one and decide which ones we want to keep and which ones we want to get rid of, because I think a lot of them we might want to get rid of. But we're just going to play them all and just see. Some of them might be a total flop, but whatever, right? It's just something that we're doing. So pick something that you can do, a new skill you can learn, find some things that you want to do, plan those. And then also, I would say ask your kids what they want for you, what they want from you. I had a little bit of a conversation with my kids, and I'm going to have another conversation with them tomorrow. Like, when are the times I have to do screen work at such and such at least 2-3 times a day, whatever it is? When do you want to have access to me? When does it really bug you when I'm on a screen? And then you can even have consequences. Like, if they catch you, then what does that mean? You get to take everyone to ice cream? Like, what are you doing? What's the consequence? And it can be a reward for the whole family. But show them that you're in it too. Show them that you are just as committed as they are to this thing. And if it's hard for them, are you willing to do the hard with them?
Okay, awesome. So we've spent a lot of time with going through these concerns, and we spent a lot of time last week talking about the negative consequences that screens have on us, on our kids. So I want to spend the last few minutes here talking about painting a picture of what you can expect things to look like if you successfully complete the fast and then continue following these principles for months and years to come. So a little bit of, not all the downer, but what are the good things you can look forward to? So a couple things I wanted to point out. We're going to go through a list of what you can expect within days. And these things are averages, right? Not everybody develops or responds like the average. Some are high, some are sooner, some take longer. But this should give you an idea of things that you can be looking for short term and then a little bit more long term. But first, I wanted to just highlight, I'm kind of catching up with where Bonnie's at in reading. So I came across this part where it talks about what a brain needs for healthy development, especially in children. And there's 5 things that a healthy brain needs for development. And as you listen to these, just think about how screens prevent these activities. So what we're talking about in a lot of cases is, yes, that there's negative things, hyperarousal and stimulation, blood flows away from the frontal lobe, all these other things that happen with screens. But what we're really talking about here is eliminating the things that are causing those negatives and replacing them with just natural experiences that lead to normal brain development. So first thing is not under constant stress. We talked last week about how screens create a dopamine relationship that leaves kids and us in a constant fight or flight scenario, a constant state of stress.
And your cortisol levels are crazy high.
Cortisol levels, which is the stress hormone, are elevated. Number 2, you need adequate downtime and rest. Even if you're going to bed on time and waking up on time, that screen usage is preventing you from going into deep levels of REM sleep. So you can't get the downtime and the rest that your brain needs to process information and regulate itself and get ready for another day. Number 3, nurturing parent and child interactions. I'm thinking of myself on Sunday mornings Sundays as I spend time researching something on YouTube. My kids are playing around me. There's not interaction that should happen. You can see this at every park that you go to these days where, parents, and I've been there pretty recently, parents are on the phone, kids are playing, no interactions happening. So this really, or you've probably seen it in your house where you're on a phone, your kid's on the phone, no real interactions happening. You have to text your kid to get their attention. Number 4, a variety of stimulation acquired through interaction with the natural environment. So things like getting your hands dirty, right? Kids playing in dirt and making dirt melt, like all of that input is way better developmentally than anything you can get from tapping a smooth screen.
And with that, just because my childhood development background comes in here, that means the untamed, the untouched by human hands. So you're talking hiking up in the mountains. You're not talking going to the park with a nice manicured lawn that's been graded and there's no bumps or hills. It's so important for kids to run on uneven surfaces where there's that crazy pothole or whatever it is. Such good brain growth happens, such good brain development happens. So when you're thinking it's not just go outside in my nice manicured, you're like, we got to get out away from these well manicured areas and go find some real rough stuff to go have some fun in.
And then number 5, the brain needs the body to move and feel stuff. That kind of is similar to what we were talking about before, but screens make it harder to do all of these things, or they just rob time that we could spend doing these things. And instead,
VR doesn't count as moving your body.
I'm so interested to see in 30 years from now, the research that comes out about virtual reality. I mean, if going from screens to little tiny screens in front of you, but then putting that in and making it immersive and surrounding the dopamine releasing, the dysregulation of the nervous system has to be out of this world.
So much more.
I remember playing a video game at a friend's house last Christmas, or a VR game, and I kind of tested myself. I looked at the clock before I went in, and then looked at the clock afterwards, and way more time had passed than I thought. It was a weird thing. So, yeah, please. Oh, stay away from VR. And we don't have to wait for the studies. We can apply common sense here and we can look at the research. We don't need to wait 30 years for studies and people's lives to be destroyed by this technology for us to start using it appropriately now. So,
and she said, who knows what's going to be here before this book even hits the shelves. And she talked about how that the next wave was the electronics you can wear, right? Wearable electronics. So it's like the smartwatches. Those are huge now. I mean, just this was released in 2015. I don't know when the smartwatch became a thing, but I feel like it probably was right about that time. So there's a lot of this wearable technology is going to be impacting us in ways that there's not a lot of research out yet. So just use the things that we've learned from this to apply throughout.
Yep. Okay. So what can we expect within a few days of starting this tech fast on average?
Within a few days, you can expect the child's initial negative reaction to the plan, tearfulness, anger, arguing, and so on, to subside. The child's mood, attitude, and compliance to begin to improve. The child begins to sleep better and may go to bed earlier.
That is a win, parents.
Can I tell you how true this is for me already? I started having my phone being charged in my bathroom instead of on my nightstand. And already I'm like, I'm getting more sleep. This is crazy. I'm getting more sleep. Play begins to become more creative and more physical. I have seen this in my children when we've done short-term fasts. It is amazing to me how I'm like, oh my gosh, you are so creative. It's amazing. And more physical. That does mean that there's some rough and tumble play too. And that's good.
That's actually really good developmentally.
Really good development. Yeah. The child's initial preoccupation with restoring screen time diminishes, especially with younger children. When can I have it back? It starts to diminish. And negotiations over this may still linger, but also remember, I don't know if I mentioned this last time, don't negotiate. Just hold your ground. Don't negotiate, especially with teens. It gives them a feeling of power. Don't negotiate. This is what we're doing, period. Move on. Okay, so that's within days.
Okay, and then weeks. So we're talking, this is kind of the time frame then of the screen fast. So we got a few days out to a few weeks. By the end of the screen fast, what would we see?
Meltdowns become less frequent or less severe or both. The child's mood becomes brighter and more stable. Can I tell you how more stable is such a huge blessing? The child's attention improves, sometimes dramatically, and the child stays on task more easily. Grades noticeably improve. We are so excited to give a new updated report card version and see, what happened here? Sleep deepens and becomes more restorative, promoting the healing process and allowing the brain to reset biochemically. Stuff that I can't even really wrap my head around. The restoring, healing process that our kids and our bodies need to go through. The child's body clock or circadian rhythm resynchronizes to daylight hours, which helps normalize the sleep-wake cycle, stress hormones, the immune system, and serotonin levels. The brain reclaims lost cellular energy due to decreased inflammation. Inflammation happens, and electronics play a role there. The blood flow in the brain shifts from primitive survival areas to higher learning centers, including that frontal lobe. Notice that that's not a within days. That's a within weeks. It takes time.
And this is where, so we've had a policy at school where, no screens Sunday through Thursday, but then it's okay on the weekends and they can kind of come off of
give them the 24 hour.
Give them the 24 hour. And there are some benefits to that, but we're not seeing nearly all of it. Like there's,
and
this is where again, like we could have done better if we had known, but
I will say though, like I had a kindergartner who the parents took that challenge to just take him off Sunday through Thursday after school. And he was only doing video games and screens Thursday evening after homework and then Friday and Saturday. And that child doubled the amount of work that he was producing at school. He doubled it. And it doubled within right about a week and a half of him starting that. And then it died the weekend. Like they started watching screens on or they started continuing it on anyways. But it was like the Monday that it kept
within
going.
A couple days.
It was back to the pace it was prior to that. So like it was such a drastic 100% more work was being done by him. And then immediately he was back to that prior halftime work. And that was just with that, like still doing it on the weekends. So I'm super, super intrigued to see what would happen. I mean, it just is amazing to me. It's amazing to me. I'm super excited.
There could be a lot of gains that were left on the table.
Well, and behavior hadn't necessarily improved other than attention span. But like as far as interpersonal social relationships, maybe that could have improved over time. Like it's just so fascinating. Okay, increasingly more homework is completed and in less time. And doing homework becomes less torturous for both child and parents. Think about those projects, parents. Think about those projects. Are you ready for those to be less torturous? I am. In interactions, the child eye contact improves. Conversations are longer, and the child listens better. It's so fun to have good, meaningful conversations with your kids. Like, so much fun. The child exhibits better sportsmanship and better manners in general. Sensory processing often improves such that the child becomes less sensitive to environmental stimuli and is less likely to become overstimulated.
Okay, that's huge just over the course of the screen fast. Now, in a couple of weeks or next week or the week after, we're going to talk about, all right, how do you start managing this long term? But we talked about this last week. We're moving into some lifestyle changes that are going to yield incredible results. This is just the start of it. But in the interest of time, there's another list here that talks about, what you can expect over the coming months or years as you continue being very purposeful about screen usage with our kids. But in the interest of time, I think we jump right to the case studies. So Billy, he was a straight A student, but socially delayed. So good student, but did have trouble interacting interpersonally, was argumentative, would get into verbal confrontations with students at school. And typically this isn't a student that would really make it high on the radar of a teacher.
No, because
Right.
academically they're fine.
But what happened? So she recommended the screen fast and then carefully controlling. So they did the screen fast and then they started implementing electronics slowly. And what happened?
He reverted.
He reverted immediately. So things like just watching a little bit of TV. So they decided for a very long period of time, no TV whatsoever. And
A couple of months. Like, you're talking some time. There's some time there.
But then he reverted. So they went right back to what they were doing before.
Yeah.
And I think they tried again a few
6
months
months,
later,
right,
6 months later. So they try this multiple times. And eventually, over the course of many, many years, he was able to get to where he could handle a little bit of screen time. But how did this kid develop socially because of this?
He just blossomed. He blossomed. Without screens, he was able to socially make such better connections with friends. He was able to increase his peer group. It was just awesome. He ended up like organizing neighborhood-wide sport things, like just kind of all on his own, where before he was very unsportsmanlike. He had poor sportsmanship. He was, kids didn't really want to play with him because he was argumentative, but now he was kind of the ringleader, gathering people together. And leadership, organization, planning, communication, taking initiative. Like, isn't that how you want you want your kids described like that, right? Like the leaders in the group.
Yeah. And then the part that really hit me the most was right at the very end of the story. She talks about, a lot of parents would ask, and Billy's mom could have asked. He's a straight A student. Yeah, he's got some social issues, but what's the big deal? Is it really are screens really that big of a problem? How would you respond to that?
You don't have anything to lose by trying and seeing what gains you might have. And you don't know what benefits you could be robbing your child of if you don't do it. So give it a try and see what happens.
Yeah, you screens.
Academics are great. What shows up on a report card is important. I'm not saying it's not, but it's only a part of what a child is. Those social relationships are so important. They're so important. I can't even it is sad to me when people are just concerned about what's on that report card. I actually truly hate writing report cards. I really hate it because it shows such a black and white, one-sided picture, and it bugs the crud out of me. It just is
vision.
it is. It's very narrow. It's very just certain aspects. I'm like, no. Let me talk about the rest of your child, because there's so much to your child that maybe doesn't show up on that report card, and I can't put it into numbers, but it's amazing and wonderful to see. So that social relationship and that social ability, the ability to be an empath, to connect to others, to read the room and read another person's facial features and all those things. To me, it's more important than that report card. To me, I'm like, oh, straight A student, but they're struggling socially. Let's give this a try, because this is so incredibly important.
Well, and let's back it up even further. Straight A student with no obvious issues socially. If screens are robbing them of any development of potential.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
What are you trading that lost potential for? It's entertainment. That's it. And entertainment's not worth it. Okay. Sorry. I want to end this with, there's 2 case studies. I want to very briefly summarize that kind of point this out. You've got James. So this is a kid good student. Let's see, extremely bright, had a little bit of ADHD with some anxiety and depression, very shy. And mom and dad just kind of weren't willing to give anything a try, not medication, not a screen fast. And, for a long time, all the way through elementary school, there were no major issues. He spent a lot of time on computers and had good computer skills. He was rewarded with computer time for being good at school. But heading into middle school, the social interactions became more and more challenging, more and more problematic. And ultimately, this kind of progressed and built over time to where, when he was an adult, he didn't have the attention span to submit job applications, to submit college applications, was up late, gaming, and so would miss work and just could not hold down a job, could not hold down any meaningful relationships with girlfriends because he just wouldn't talk or had a hard time making eye contact.
The text conversations were good, but real life was not.
Right. Right. I forgot about that part. So, he, a couple small challenges, but really had everything going for them. And then just over the course, or going for him, and over the course of time that diminished. But tell me about Liam. He kind of came into the world with a very different set of challenges.
Oh my goodness, yes. So when she met him, he was 9. He had ADHD, learning disabilities, bipolar, OCD. He had been exposed to methamphetamine in utero, so his brain was particularly sensitive to all the different stimuli. Like he just had everything stacked against him as far as, and he was overstimulated. His parents said that he was like literally climbing up the walls. Like he was just so incredibly, couldn't handle himself. He had no friends because he was just so hyperactive. He couldn't connect to anybody. Everyone kind of thought he was a little annoying, like hard to be friends with somebody that can't stop moving. Just really had a hard time.
Okay. But they were very willing to implement the no screen policies. He had very, very limited screen access throughout his growing up years. And, by the time he was in his early 20s, was able to have meaningful work, meaningful relationships, was a well-functioning person. And, this is someone that when you go to like adoption classes, when you have methamphetamine or drug usage exposure in utero, you're often told that they're going to be limited in what they can do. But by all accounts, he's living a more successful life than James was, who had who was dealt a far easier hand. So,
but also he's 22, he's independent, but even at 22 years old, he limits his electronic screen usage. Yeah. He has a minor amount of texting, doesn't email much. He doesn't do Facebook time. Doesn't do Facebook. He does 0 video games. He manages himself, and that's why he's able to stay successful because his brain is still developing. His prefrontal lobe is still developing. He's not there yet.
All that's stacked against him, he will probably never be able to allow himself to pick up video games. And that's so terrible. He's going to be a well-functioning person for his entire life, despite all this that's happening. We kind of started talking about it earlier, and I want to end with this. We talked about it a little bit last time too. This statistic that 11-year-olds are performing at the place of 8-year-olds from 30 years ago. They've tracked. There's kind of a phenomenon in developed countries where over the course of decades, and in our country this was true, that every decade IQs on average were climbing, and that was true through the 70s. But beginning in the 80s and 90s, that started to decline and it plateaued and peaked in the 90s. And then from that point forward, IQs have been dropping. Now, there's lots of things we can point to, but if you look at the major changes to society that happened during that time, it's hard to find anything that has had a bigger impact on society and on the way people interact and on the way people learn than technology and screens and televisions and video games and all of these other things. Airplanes are a little faster. Cars are made out of a little bit of different material. Phones look a little bit different. Copy machines, but all of those things were there then. They've just maybe gotten a little bit better. The big transformational things have come in in media, period. Correlation is not equal to causation, but when you see this pattern repeated over and over and on an individual basis, it's pretty obvious that there is a strong causal relationship between those. Now, all of that being said, if we have an 11-year-old and maybe she is operating at a level before what her peers would have 50, 30 years ago, I don't know. And I don't know how to gauge that exactly. I didn't do all that research personally. But I think the biggest thing to take from all of this is that even if we are seeing that in our own kids, that doesn't mean that we're stuck there. There is a path to fix it. And she talks about this all the time. In some of these case studies that we just reviewed, there are leaps and bounds that can be made by making changes today. That's true if your kid's 5. That's true if they're 11. That's true if you're a 39-year-old person ready to make some changes yourself. Not only are there scientific reasons for why making these changes will work, but we also have the atonement of Jesus Christ that can fix everything and anything. So again, I want to leave you on this note. Don't be discouraged. It's never too late to start. And, by you doing this with your family, that may not change the national average, but you certainly can reverse course and change that for your kids. And we can do it for ours, and we can do it for our school community, and maybe even a little bit wider community than that. So stick it out, stay strong. We're going to do this with you. Good things coming. Hope you have a great week, this first week. Good luck, everybody.
Thank you for listening to Abide in Liberty. Make sure you subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes, and share this with friends and family. In the meantime, keep up with the show online at abideinliberty.com. Also, if you'd like to help our K-12 bless and educate more families, contact us by visiting libertyyouthacademy.org. Until next time, be on the alert, stand firm in the faith, and be strong.